Among the millions of stories out there, some don't need loud dialogues or stage lights, yet they still leave people speechless, just by a glance, a faint whimper, or the gentle wag of a tail when hope is reignited. Today I want to share with you the story of Chance, a dog who seemed to have been forgotten by the entire world, lost in a frozen forest. No one called his name, no one came back to find him, and yet a miracle happened. Not just survival, but a journey of healing for both a man and a small soul. If you love stories that touch the heart about rebirth, compassion, and the kind of miracles born from small acts of kindness, hit that subscribe button now. Every week we'll bring you stories that not only move you to tears, but remind you to believe in the goodness of people. Today's journey begins with a glance, and maybe, just maybe, you could be the one to change an entire world for someone out there. The biting cold of a desolate forest. A faint whimper rises from beneath a rotting tree stump. Icy winds cut through the bare branches, blowing thin snow and brittle twigs in all directions. No one in sight, not a single footprint. Only a pair of sunken, reddened eyes belonging to a small creature struggling to survive the cruel silence of nature. It was a dung. His once snowy fur was now matted with dirt-dried blood and fear. So emaciated his ribs showed clearly, each breath a desperate effort. No one knew where he came from. No one knew how long he had been abandoned. But the rotten collar around his neck, once a symbol of love and belonging, was now the only proof that he had once been someone's. Some people said they had passed through the forest and heard a sound something like crying. But everyone hurried on, because of the harsh weather, because the path was dangerous, because, well, it was just a dog. No one knew that for 5 long years before he wandered into this frozen forest, he had lived his entire life chained to a rusty post in the backyard of an abandoned house. Rain, scorching heat, bitter cold, hunger, these had become his everyday reality. No one called his name. No one stepped outside to pet him or even to place a bowl of clean water in front of him. He learned to live without waiting and without hope. The only sound was the jingle of his chain as he shifted, trying to avoid the bone-chilling rain. Then one day the owner left and never came back. The chain was undone not to set him free, but because the house was being sold. And the dog was not part of the moving plans. He was chased away like a nuisance. No one looked into his eyes one last time. From that moment on, the wandering began. But during that journey, no one ever truly stopped. Until this morning. A pair of boots came to a halt beside the rotting tree stump where he lay barely breathing. A quiet breath. A deep, warm voice. "Oh my God, you're still alive." He couldn't understand the words. But that voice, it wasn't like anything he had heard before. It wasn't cold. It wasn't harsh. There was a surprise in it and something else. A trace of sorrow. The dog tried to lift his head. His eyes, cloudy, panicked, met those of the man. In that fleeting moment between the cold and the cruelty, something stirred as if the frozen world around them had exhaled its first warm breath in years. The forest didn't have a name on any map. It was a forgotten land nestled between low northern hills, abandoned for over a decade. Every winter, snow covered the ground like a blanket, hiding the last traces of humanity, a collapsed roof, shards of glass catching moonlight, and a rusting bus stop. In that place, the cold didn't just sting skin, it seemed to suffocate sound itself. Everything was so still that if a single leaf fell, you could hear it hit the ground. At the heart of that forest stood an old wooden house, half its roof caved in, walls cracked and covered in moss. The back door hung ajar, just wide enough for a small creature to squeeze through. No one knew who had lived there or if anyone truly had. But right behind the house, a rusted iron stake still clung stubbornly to the frozen earth, a final remnant of a presence that had long since vanished. And besides that stake, a faint imprint in the snow, a shallow circle where the snow hadn't settled evenly because a small body had lain there all winter. A dog. He no longer had the strength to run, or the voice to bark. Only a faint breath and eyes that were no longer fully closed, as if he had forgotten how. He was so thin it seemed a gust of wind might blow him away. Patches of fur had fallen out, revealing bruised, darkened skin. His nails curled unnaturally from years of neglect. His belly caved inward, ribs jutting like jagged stones. Cuts still unhealed, dried blood crusting his limbs. One ear is torn. His left hind leg, likely dislocated or broken, had never been treated. No one had heard his cries for 3 winters. Because he had learned, not to cry. In the beginning, when he was still chained behind that house, he would bark and whimper every time he felt hungry or when rain soaked him to the bone. But the barking was met with silence. The water bowl stayed empty, missed meals. The owner who once gently patted his head now only tossed scraps of stale bread through the window until the day they left without a word. He was left behind like an old, useless object. When the chain finally broke, he still didn't leave the iron post, maybe because his leg was injured, maybe because he didn't know where else to go. His world had always been that small yard, a 2-meter chain, and the sound of wind whistling through wooden boards. Slowly winter came. Snow fell. Food ran out. Water froze in the old bowl. He dug through the snow for crusts of bread. Some days he gnawed on dry twigs just to feel something in his mouth. Once a fox darted across the yard, and all he could do was watch. No strength, no reaction. Each day was not a day lived, but a day survived. Not living, just existing. His eyes no longer held life. They were the eyes of a creature who had given up hope, no longer expecting an embrace, or even the sound of someone calling his name. Not afraid, not joyful, not inner, not angry, just empty. When sounds came from the forest, he no longer lifted his head. Those sounds never brought anything good. He knew that now. In the heart of the cold forest, the life of such a small creature was no more than a fragile breath ready to be swept away by the wind. No one passed through. No one knew that a soul still clung desperately to scattered pieces of broken time, waiting for a miracle without a name. It was strange that he was still alive. No miracle, no explanation. But maybe deep beneath the fear and pain, a tiny spark of belief remained that one day someone would find him. And on that morning, someone finally did. He wasn't from around there. He had only taken a shortcut through the forest on his way to the cemetery where he brought flowers to his late wife each month. But when his eyes met the silent form beside the old house, his heart clenched. The dog didn't move, didn't growl, didn't run. Just a single tear fell from his dry eyes as the man knelt, arms open, and whispered in a trembling voice, "I'm here. I'm so sorry. You waited too long." The man's name was Graham Tucker, 54 years old, a retired veteran. He lived alone in a small wooden cabin on the edge of town. He wasn't a talkative man, didn't like crowds. Ever since his wife passed away from cancer 4 years ago, his life has been quietly hollow. That morning, he only meant to take a shortcut through the woods to save time. But the weather turned suddenly. Thick fog, scattered snow, no phone signal. As he tried to find his way, he paused in front of a crumbling house he'd never seen on any map. He was about to walk on when something made him stop. A small movement like a breath, a faint whimper barely louder than the rustling of dry leaves. And then he saw him, a dog, curled up in the corner of the back wall, barely distinguishable from the ground, motionless, unresisting, only his eyes. And those eyes met Graham's with a kind of emotion no words could capture. Not pleading, not anger, but emptiness that made the heart ache. "Oh my God, you're still alive," Graham whispered, stepping slowly forward, feet sinking into the snow. The dog flinched but didn't flee. His body recoiled, eyes dropping as if bracing for a kick or a shout. His reaction said everything. He had been beaten, chased, unloved. Graham stopped. He didn't step closer. Instead, he slowly pulled a piece of cold ham sandwich from his backpack, his planned lunch. With hands trembling from the cold, he placed the food a few feet from the dog, then sat down lower than the dog's eye level. "It's okay. I won't hurt you. Eat." The dog didn't move. The smell tempted him, but fear was too deeply rooted. Graham waited. He sat there for 15 minutes in the howling wind, completely still, just to show the he meant no harm. Eventually, after many cautious glances, the dog dragged himself forward on his front legs inch by inch. Then he ate, slowly, ravenously, as if he didn't believe it was real. When the last crumbs were gone, Graham extended a hand, still speaking softly. "Good boy. My name's Graham. And you? I don't know what your name is, but if you'll let me, I'd like to take you out of here today." The dog looked at him silently. No tail wag, no lick, but no retreat either. That was his answer. Graham understood. He took off his coat and gently wrapped the dog's frail body, then pulled a rope from his bag to fashion a makeshift collar. Through it all, the dog didn't bite, didn't resist. He was simply too weak. Rain began to fall. Snowflakes thickened. The wind sliced through layers of clothing. The road back to town suddenly felt impossibly long. Graham looked at the snow-covered path, then down at the fragile being beside him. He couldn't carry him the whole way, but he couldn't leave him behind either. "We'll get through this. Together." He put his rain poncho over the dog's head, clipped a flashlight to his jacket, hoisted a heavier-than-usual backpack, and began the long walk step by step through woods, over slopes, braving a cold that could kill anything fragile. Behind every one of Graham's footsteps were two small paw prints, following shakily. The dog trembled but didn't stop. As long as Graham kept walking, he would too. And in that moment when a seemingly hardened man met a creature forgotten by the world, something began to bloom. Not just the rescue of a dog, but the beginning of healing for two broken souls. The snowstorm lasted 3 hours, but Graham and the little dog made it through nearly 8 kilometers back to town. When they arrived at the local animal rescue center, where Graham knew a few staff members, it was almost 7 p.m. The soft glow of yellow light filtered through misted glass, casting warmth on the filthy, tattered figure that had just stepped into a brand new life. The dog had no name. On his intake form, it read, "Male dog, mixed breed, critical condition." But Graham gave him a name, Chance. Because if he survived long enough for me to find him, Graham told the vet, while signing the paperwork, then I believe he deserves a real chance. He lay still in the heated kennel. No eating, no looking at anyone, no barking. Only when a loud sound startled him would he open his eyes, then quickly bury his head into the corner as if trying to disappear. The vet reported he's severely malnourished, has mild pneumonia, and his left leg may require corrective surgery. And mentally, he's deeply traumatized. On his very first day, he was vaccinated, given antibiotics, bathed with warm water mixed with antiseptic, had anti-inflammatory cream applied, and his bandages changed every 12 hours. Every touch required patience, not because he was aggressive, but because the pain and fear made his entire body tremble. Graham visited the shelter every day. Sometimes he brought boiled chicken. Other times he brought the old knitted scarf his wife had made. But the one thing he always brought was his gentle voice and unwavering gaze. "You really love him, don't you?" said Emily, a shelter worker. Graham just smiled. "He reminds me of myself, abandoned, lost, and no longer believing I was worthy of being loved." On the 5th day, something small happened. Chance wagged his tail for the first time. It wasn't clear whether it was because of the delicious meat Graham brought, or because Graham had sat silently by his kennel for an hour, gently tapping the plastic floor in a soothing rhythm. The wag was so subtle it almost looked accidental. But Graham saw it, and his eyes welled with tears. I don't know how many times I cried watching him sleep peacefully in my lap. But that one wag, I knew he had forgiven this world, at least a little. From that moment on, the change was slow but real. Chance began to eat on his own, lick the hands of the staff, and eventually let Graham hold him without curling up in fear. His wounds began to heal. His fur started to grow back in soft golden brown patches. The vet said he was physically recovering faster than expected, but the most important sign was in his eyes. If during the first week those eyes were dull and emotionless, now they held a spark, a flicker of curiosity, awareness, and perhaps hope. Chance grew accustomed to the sound of human voices. He learned to recognize the sound of Graham's footsteps from afar. Whenever Graham arrived, Chance would lift his head, perk his ears slightly, and pull his body up as best he could. Emily recalled seeing him dream once, his legs twitching like he was running his mouth, making faint noises. When he awoke and saw Graham sitting there, he gently pressed his face into Graham's hand. Not a bark, but a wordless expression of trust. After 3 weeks, Chance could walk normally. His leg had stabilized with splints, and no surgery was required. His back was now fully covered with fur. He had gained nearly 3 kilograms. And the most miraculous thing of all, he began to bark again. Not a threatening bark, but a joyful yelp when Graham opened the door. "I think he's learning how to live all over again," the vet said, eyes glistening as Chance gently hopped around Graham, carrying his old scarf like it was a treasure. A month later, the shelter suggested listing Chance for adoption. But Graham refused. "I don't think I can let him go. Because when I look into his eyes, I see a part of myself, something I thought was lost long ago. I didn't save him. We saved each other." And so on a sunlit afternoon, Chance left the shelter in Graham's arms. Around his neck was a brand new leather collar with a small tag engraved "Chance Tucker," always home. From a silent, terrified skeletal creature, Chance slowly became an irreplaceable part of Graham's peaceful life. They lived together in the small wooden house on the edge of town with a sunny porch, a grassy backyard, and a dirt road that led back to the forest, the same road they had once walked through a blizzard together. Chance learned to play. At first, he just ran around the yard with the old scarf. Then came the simple games, chasing a ball, rolling on dry grass, playfully barking at his own shadow in the sunlight. The way he wagged his tail when excited, tucked his ears when guilty, or licked Graham's hand after a cough, it was as if he was discovering the world for the first time with the innocent soul of a child. His trust in people returned little by little. No longer did he flinch or hide behind furniture. Now he would raise his head to strangers, letting them pet him. With the children in the neighborhood, Chance became a trusted companion. He would lie patiently at their feet as they drew chalk art on the sidewalk. One little girl even whispered secrets into his ear, and Chance, like a solemn guardian, just blinked and licked her cheek. One day, Graham brought Chance to a local mental health center where he used to attend a veteran support group. Initially, I just wanted to let him visit some patients, but the response was surprising. An older man who hadn't spoken to anyone in months reached out to pet Chance the moment he laid his head on his lap. A young boy with severe anxiety giggled when Chance shook hands with a clumsy paw. Chance's presence became a silent therapy, unspoken, unforced, but healing. The center later enrolled Chance in therapy dog training with Graham as his partner. For 6 weeks, the once abandoned dog learned how to befriend pain and trauma. He wasn't the most skilled in class. He didn't master all the commands like the purebreds, but he had one remarkable gift: he knew how to listen. One warm May afternoon, Chance's story reached a deeply moving turning point. That day, Graham agreed to watch over his neighbor's 6-year-old niece, Ellie, a quiet, withdrawn girl with social anxiety after her parents divorced. When she arrived, Chance lay in his usual corner. Ellie sat curled up by the window, clutching a worn-out stuffed toy. Graham didn't force anything, he let them be. And then, just a few minutes later, Chance quietly stood up and walked over to the girl. No barking, no jumping. He simply rested his soft, furry head on her lap. Ellie looked down, at first unsure. Then slowly, gently, she placed her hand on his head. Not a word was spoken. From that day on, Ellie visited Graham's house almost daily to play with the golden doggy friend. She began to smile, talk, and even hum little tunes while sitting with Chance in the backyard. Once, when Graham gave her an ice cream, she accidentally dropped the spoon. As she looked around for it, Chance picked it up and gently placed it in her hand, then gave her a soft lick on her tiny fingers, a wordless reassurance. That night, Ellie's aunt shared what the girl had said at bedtime: "I'm not scared anymore, because the doggy friend is protecting me." From that moment on, Chance was no longer just a rescued dog. He was a symbol of rebirth. He visited the children's hospital every Monday. He helped older adults reconnect with old memories. He sat quietly beside veterans every Sunday afternoon, saying nothing but healing simply by being there. Every time Graham saw Chance curled up under the golden light of late afternoon, he thought back to that first day in the snowy forest, the very first time Chance trembled and licked his hand. And Graham knew that that moment wasn't just about survival. It was a promise that if we give someone a chance, they might just change the world. One early autumn morning, as the leaves began to turn and the wind carried the gentle scent of year's end, Graham brought Chance to the park as usual. But this day was different. It marked exactly 1 year since he had found the dog in that frozen forest. 1 year. Just 12 months, yet enough time for a soul that had seemed spiritually dead to rediscover life, love, and faith in humanity. Graham sat on a wooden bench under an old oak tree, holding a cup of coffee, eyes following Chance as he joyfully played with the neighborhood children. No longer was he that trembling creature once chained to a rusted post. His coat was now sleek, eyes bright, and his tail gently wagging whenever someone called his name. A little girl sat down, gently stroking Chance's head. She looked up and asked, "Sir, where did he come from?" Graham smiled. But behind that smile was a wave of emotion rising from deep within. You know, he came from a place far away, a place no one thought he could survive. But sometimes miracles happen if someone is willing to listen. And in that sentence lies the heart of this entire story. It wasn't the dog who was saved, it was us who were saved from indifference. In a world flooded daily with chaos, cruelty, and noise, it's easy to overlook the faint whimper, the silent plea in a creature's eyes. We rush through life so fast we forget that a gentle glance, A bowl of leftover food or pausing for just a few minutes can be enough to save a life. Chance never spoke. He couldn't tell the story of his years of hunger beatings and abandonment, but his body told it. His eyes told it. And thankfully, one person just one stopped long enough to listen. Graham wasn't wealthy, nor was he a hero. He had never planned to save anything in his life. But standing there in the freezing woods, staring at a soul that refused to give up even after the world had given up on him, he understood when a living being has nothing left but breath, it's up to those of us who still carry warmth to be the final light. You can change the entire world, or at least the world of one small soul. You don't need to do something grand. Not everyone can rescue hundreds of animals, but each person, by reaching out to just one, can forever alter the path of that life. Look at the way Chance ran toward Graham. Look at how he sat quietly beside Patience, how he licked little Ellie's hand, a girl who once thought she'd never smile again. That was a miracle not born of magic but of human compassion, and the revival of a heart that had once been broken. Graham often said, "I didn't save him. He's the one who saved me from loneliness, from helplessness." I saw myself in his eyes, his resilience, his quiet endurance, and his longing to be loved again. And he wasn't exaggerating. Somewhere out there, there are thousands, maybe millions of chances still huddled under broken roofs, inside rusty cages, or chained behind forgotten fences. All they need is a glimmer of hope, a moment of attention, a name. Imagine if Graham had hurried past that forest that day. If he hadn't stopped, hadn't reached out, the world wouldn't have just lost a ball. It would have lost a story about kindness, survival, and love, reborn from ruin. If you've ever looked into the eyes of a dog on the street, if you've ever thought about adopting, remember Chance's eyes. Eyes that once held despair, silence, and a soul nearly gone lit up again when given a chance. Remember, adopting a dog isn't just about giving a home, it's about receiving a whole heart. Every life you rescue becomes a new story written on a fresh page. And sometimes what you're searching for, connection, unconditional love, a reason to smile in the morning, comes from a being that the world once discarded. Share this story if you believe in small miracles, because every share is another opportunity for someone out there to open their heart, to pause, and to become the next Graham to a waiting chance, because we don't need magic. We just need a heart willing to stop and look into the eyes of a soul quietly begging to live. In this busy life surrounded by headlines and fast-scrolling feeds, the fact that you stop to listen to a story like this about a little dog, about compassion and hope, is truly meaningful. We know not everyone has the time or resources to rescue an abandoned animal, but sometimes a small gesture, a gentle hug for your pet, or simply feeling empathy is enough to light up a corner of this world. Chance's story isn't just about a dog being saved. It's a gentle reminder that each of us carries the power to heal not just others, but ourselves. Thank you for opening your heart. Thank you for giving a few minutes of your life to believe in something kind. And if you can let today's emotion ripple a little farther to a friend, a loved one, or even back to yourself on a hard day, we're grateful for your presence. And we hope that someday you'll be the light someone else lost and desperate is hoping to find.